MatPat is one of the greatest creators of our generation, and for a decade he's held up and run multiple staple channels across the platform.
A decade-old channel should not exist on this platform, really.
With a grand total of 40 million subscribers, MatPat has collaborated with some of the largest creators on the planet, raised millions of dollars for charity, and has even gotten his own cameo in the FNAF movie.
You do realize that lunch is the most important meal of the day.
But things weren't always this good.
And no one wanted to give me a chance. They saw me as just like, oh, you're the theater kid.
So today, I'm gonna tell you how MatPat went from being unemployed and living out of a suitcase to becoming one of the most iconic creators of all time. This is the story of MatPat. MatPat, or Matthew, was born on November 16, 1986 in Medina, Ohio. And from a young age, Matthew had a love for learning and academics. He was always at the top of his class and was an A+ student. This was mostly due to the fact that Matthew had really great loving and supporting parents, Robert and Linda Patrick, that would encourage him to do good in school. And besides that, Matthew was just naturally a really smart kid. When he was young, he was able to recite the page number as well as the location on a page that a fact was located within a textbook. This is when Matthew's parents realized that there was something special about him. Neither of Matthew's parents, or really anyone in Matthew's extended family, had ever gone to college, simply because they didn't get the opportunity to. So Matthew, being as smart as he was, his parents really emphasized how important getting a good education was. Matthew had a really great relationship with his parents, and especially with his dad. Some of his best memories as a kid were of him and his dad playing video games on his dad's original NES. They bonded over the fact that they both loved video games, to the extent that Matthew's bedroom as a kid was Super Mario themed. Matthew's dad had a very good influence on Matthew, and he taught him to never take anything at face value, but to instead question everything. Matthew's dad loved to theorize about different things, such as whether the moon landing was real or faked. And this is a big part of why Matthew loves to theorize today. Heading into high school, Matthew would call himself the super teacher's pet. He would be at school every day at 6 a.m. to set out the chairs for choir practice, and he literally had perfect A+. Needless to say, he was the perfect student. The only downside of high school was the fact that people would make fun of him for being a theater kid. Matthew didn't necessarily care though, because he really loved theater and he had dreams of being on Broadway one day. Matthew was very goal-oriented, and he didn't let anything get in the way of his goals. He ended up graduating high school as the valedictorian of his class and had a perfect 1600 on his SAT. This led him to getting a full-ride scholarship to Duke University, where he would major in theater and psychology, with a focus in neuroscience. College wasn't really that eventful for Matthew. He didn't really go out and party, he stayed goal-oriented and just focused on theater and getting good grades. The only eventful thing that really happened in college was Matthew met a girl named Stephanie Cordato in a game programming class. They got to know each other pretty well because their dorms were close together. So Matthew would essentially walk with Steph from the class all the way to her dorm every day. But the first time that they really actually bonded was over their final project. For this project, they needed to make a full working game. And since Matthew and Steph already kind of knew each other, they teamed up on the project. Neither Matthew or Steph never really liked group projects because they were always the one to carry the entire group. But since they were both pretty smart and were going to put in good effort, they thought it might be fun to try to get the highest grade in the class. So Matthew and Steph began working on a game that was going to be a parody of The Legends of Zelda called The Epic of Stu. Stu was a combination of the names Stephanie and Matthew, and the premise of the game was pretty close to The Legends of Zelda, except for one minor detail. When you defeat all the bad guys and you save the girl at the end, you would have to treat the woman with respect, or else you would lose the entire game. This gave the game an interesting twist, and they ended up getting the highest grade in the class. Matthew and Steph would begin dating after they made the Legends of Stu game. They were both crazy for each other and really wanted things to work out between them. But Matthew graduated college in 2009 and still had dreams of going into theater. so Matthew began traveling from regional theater to regional theater chasing his dream of acting. While Steph moved to New York because she was going to go to college at Weill Cornell Medical University. She wanted to go here and get her master's degree in science. But behind the scenes, she really wanted to go here because she knew Matthew would eventually end up in New York due to this being the place where Broadway was. Matthew continued to travel from regional theater to regional theater for about 7 months, and during this time, Steph would occasionally take bus rides to go and see him. Money was super tight for the both of them, so she was never really able to afford a plane ticket. After the 7 months of Matthew traveling, he would come to New York for auditions, but since Matthew didn't have enough money to rent an apartment, he ended up staying with Steph in her dorm. It was a small dorm, but anything was better than living on the streets of New York. Matthew wasn't really bringing in that much money from acting because he rarely had an acting gig, and when he did, he was getting paid little to nothing. So in between auditions, Matthew would take little side jobs so that he was able to make some extra cash. He would do things like rigging dangerous lights high up in theaters, he was a singing bell ringer for the Salvation Army, and he sold random goods and merchandise at Union Square. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get some groceries. Matthew would go to a few auditions every week and would get rejection after rejection. He would prepare for an audition days in advance, only for the director to tell him that he should just give up on his dreams of being on Broadway. Directors were ruthless. There was even a time where Matthew was treated so poorly by a director that he called Steph while he was sitting next to a dumpster crying. Matthew never experienced this level of rejection in his life. He was always a super hard worker, and everything that he would do, he would end up succeeding at. But no matter how hard he worked at acting, it seemed like things would never work out. It was an extremely humbling experience for Matthew. Matthew continued down the path of rejection for about a year, and it seemed like the only thing getting him through this was Steph. But one day Matthew watched a Broadway musical called Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, and he heard about how actors kept breaking bones because they were getting flung across the theater by a rope.
But last fall, when the musical version of Spider-Man previewed on Broadway, it was plagued with problems. Performers were seriously injured. Reviews were dreadful.
Matthew was already super burned out, and hearing how Broadway treated their actors was the final nail in the coffin. Matthew decided to give up on his dreams of theater and get a real job. This was a hard decision for Matthew because he had worked for years toward this goal. He didn't have that much time to feel sad because he needed to get a job and make some money. Matthew began to put in job applications and submit resumes everywhere. He had a really good looking resume because he did so well in school and in college. But just like theater, he began getting rejected by everyone. He couldn't find anyone who was willing to hire him. He even put in a job application for Olive Garden and ended up getting rejected there as well. But he kept searching for a job because he didn't really have that much of a choice. One day, Matthew and Steph were walking down 2nd Avenue, and Matthew just breaks down. He tells Steph that he couldn't do this anymore, how he studied theater in college and he has no skills, and people don't want to hire him for the skills that he does have. He was just simply broken. He worked so hard for years, and it seemed like nothing was coming from it. Steph turned around to Matthew and told him how this was not true, and she proceeded to rewrite his resume inside of his head, telling him how he got a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country, and how he got a perfect score on his SAT. She told him how he also had a creative background in the performing arts, how he had both sides of his brain. He had an analytical side and also a creative side. She told him that he was going to rewrite his resume to show that he could be creative and also think analytically. And that was the job that he was going to get. During the midst of all of this, something happened that changed Matthew and Steph's lives forever. It was nearing their 1500-day anniversary, and Matthew felt like the time was right, so he made plans to propose to Steph. Stephanie was a pillar for Matthew, and he knew that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. He wanted this to be a magical moment for Stephanie, but since they didn't have that much money, he made a little home movie for Steph, essentially telling her that he wanted to marry her. And this was actually the first video to go up on the Game Theory channel other than auditions. Matthew also made a little museum inside of their apartment showing all the memorabilia from different points of their relationship. And on the 17th of November 2010, Matthew Patrick got engaged to Stephanie Cordato. Although this was an exciting time for Matthew, he still didn't have a job, and he needed one badly. Matthew really wanted to get a job working for a media company, but if he was going to get a job at a place like this, Matthew knew that he was going to need to rewrite his resume just like how Stephanie told him. He needed a way to show that he could be a creative thinker, but also that he could think analytically. But you couldn't just put something like this down on a resume, you needed a way to show this. He needed a way to show a media company his talents in production, marketing, academics, and entertainment in one neat package. If there were only a way. Well, lucky for Matthew, there was. You see, there was a YouTube channel called Extra Credits that Matthew and Steph would watch all the time, and one day they made a video about something called tangential learning. This is essentially learning in a fun and entertaining way so that you don't know that you're learning. And this is essentially what the Extra Credits channel was built off of. Matthew was very inspired and intrigued by the idea of tangential learning. And he saw how tangential learning had been used all over traditional media for decades. But other than Extra Credits, there wasn't really anything like this on YouTube at the time. So Matthew got the idea to start posting entertaining videos that would also teach you stuff. And these videos would essentially be the perfect resume, if he were able to pull it off.
I needed a way to prove to potential employers, like, I'm smart, I can research, I can edit. Hire me because I can use analytics to create a thing that people will enjoy watching, right?
He decided that if he was to do this, that it would be about video games because he always loved gaming, even though he didn't game much in the past few years. Matthew always knew that there was more that meets the eye with video games. So for the next 3 weeks, Matthew studied other successful YouTube channels and what they were doing to be successful. He studied everything from the editing and thumbnail style, scripting, and even color palettes. And he put together a channel trailer using any free software that he had on his computer.
Do you love playing video games? Are you tired of walking away from 12-hour gaming sessions feeling entertained, yet unfulfilled? Do you want to know more about the games you love without having to put in any work of your own? Well, now you can play and learn. That's right, Weboverse. Inspired by fellow gaming series Extra Credits, found here, we have created Game Theory, gaming's tangential learning experience.
It wasn't the greatest channel trailer, but it did give a clear value proposition. Matthew already knew what he was going to make his first video about. It was going to be about this game called Chrono Triggers, because this was one of his all-time favorite games. For this video, he was going to try and figure out how accurate the time travel mechanic was within the game. This video ended up being on more of the Matthew side in comparison to what he makes today because he was trying to impress a potential employer. Matthew actually had fun making the video. He ended up posting it on the 18th of April 2011. The video didn't really get a crazy amount of views, but the people that did end up watching it actually really liked it, and they could tell that Matthew put a ton of effort into it. So he decided to make a few more videos such as Super Mario Pipe Dreams or Mortal Kombat Fatalities IRL. He posted for about 2 months, then an MCN that went by the name Big Frame reached out and offered him a job. MCN stands for Multi-Channel Network, and is essentially a company that helps content creators with different aspects of running their channel. Matthew was more than happy to take the job. This was his first real job, and he had no need to post on Game Theory anymore. He had achieved his goal and had gotten a job at a media company.
I got that job, and so I figured, oh, it's time to sunset the channel. Like, achievement unlocked, I did it, time to move on. But I am a notorious completionist kind of guy, and I really thrive off of trophies and things. And so I'm like, ooh, but I could get a play button.
And besides, he was actually starting to build up a small audience on the channel. It was only a few hundred subscribers or so, but it was something. Matthew made it very clear to himself, if he was going to continue making videos on Game Theory, he had to put work first. And he would only allow himself to work on the channel after work or on the weekends. It was only going to be a little side hobby. Matthew was super happy to have gotten a job working for an MCN because he was able to explore the world of YouTube. Matthew wasn't really given a specific job at the company at first because they didn't really know what to do with him. Big Frame only knew that he was smart, so they hired him. They essentially told Matthew to figure it out. Matthew eventually found his place and made himself a valuable asset to the company. What he would do was study YouTube analytics and share what he learned to creators to help improve their channel performance. And the analytics that Matthew was studying were coming from game theory. This method was working really well, and Matthew was working wonders for Big Frame. Matthew was able to increase average video views at Big Frame by 50%, and he was also able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone because he was using this information to help grow game theory. The channel had grown from around a few hundred subscribers to 6,000 subscribers within a few months of working at the company. This wasn't even because of a viral video or anything. It was simply because of healthy, slow growth over time. Matthew's job at Big Frame was great. Except, it wasn't. You see, while Matthew was at Big Frame, he was being super overworked. And they didn't even supply him with a desk, so he had to work on a couch in a small room. At the same time, he wasn't even getting paid enough to compensate. Some might even say that he was being underpaid. Matthew didn't really think much of it because Big Frame was a relatively small MCN at the time. Matthew just figured that they didn't have enough money to pay him well. But one day Matthew got leaked a document showing how much everyone at the company was working and also how much everyone was getting paid. And Matthew saw that he was consistently the most overworked as well as underpaid employee. So as you could imagine, Matthew wasn't too happy to see this, so he immediately left Big Frame. Matthew stayed at Big Frame for over a year because he enjoyed the work and he was actually really good at it. And around the time he quit, he had grown Game Theory to around 50,000 subscribers and close to 5 million total views. These were great numbers, and they were able to begin monetizing the channel so that they could make some money on the side. But Matthew and Steph thought about it and decided against it because they didn't want to rely on a source of income that was unstable. You see, around that time, the average lifespan of a channel was only about a few years, so being a creator around that time was a lot more unstable than it is today. And this was simply because YouTube was new. Everyone thought it was just a bubble that was going to pop one day. So Matthew and Steph thought it was a bad idea to put all their hope into one channel. So they decided to keep it unmonetized for now. At the end of 2012, Matthew got another job at an MCN called Defy Media. Defy was a larger, more established MCN, and it was signed with some of the largest creators at the time, such as Smosh and Ray William Johnson. Matthew essentially did the same thing that he did for Big Frame. He would study analytics and give advice to creators. As you can imagine, Matthew worked wonders for Defy as well. He even had help in a video that ended up getting 5 million views. At the same time, Matthew and Steph were having trouble putting out weekly videos on Game Theory because they both had jobs. So what they did was they began to bring on smaller creators within the gaming niche onto their channel to start different series. For example, there was a creator named Gaijin Goomba, and he came onto Game Theory and started a series called Game Exchange. And also another creator named Ronnie Edwards that had a show called Digressing and Side Questing. This may sound weird, but in late 2012 and early 2013, this was perfectly normal for creators to share their channels in this way. So they continued to bring on different creators to the channel. But the original Game Theory series with MatPat was always the most viewed series. The Game Theorist channel as a whole kept growing steadily, and in September of 2013, Game Theory hit 500,000 subscribers. To celebrate this accomplishment, Matthew and Stephanie created a Draw My Life. In just a few months, and 7 videos later, in December of 2013, Matthew and Stephanie hit a milestone that's the universal number for success across YouTube. They hit 1 million subscribers. This was a huge deal for Matthew and Steph, not only because this was such a large number, but also because this made Game Theory the 125th largest YouTube channel at the time. It was an all-around surreal experience for Matthew and Steph. Game Theory kept growing faster and faster after hitting 1 million. Just a few months later, in April of 2014, Game Theory hit 2 million subscribers. And just a little bit later, in October of 2014, Game Theory hit 3 million subscribers. This prompted Steph and Matthew to finally turn on monetization for the channel. Although Matthew didn't leave his job at Defy because he still didn't 100% trust that Game Theory would continue to grow as strong as it had been. Matthew just felt safer because if his channel died, then he could just lean on his job. And he could do the same thing with Game Theory if he ever lost his job at Defy. But little did Matthew and Steph know, something was about to happen that would change their life. You see, people had been requesting that Matthew do a video on a game called Five Nights at Freddy's. Matthew didn't think much of it, so on the 23rd of October 2014, Matthew posted 5 Nights at Freddy's Scariest Monster is You, and this video took off and immediately passed every other video on the channel. The video currently sits at 33 million views. Little to Matthew's knowledge, he had struck gold with this video. He posted 5 more videos, including one about his cat Skip, and then he posted another video on FNAF. This video took off the same way and passed every other video on the channel, and it currently sits at 26 million views. These videos were bringing a lot of new viewers to the channel. Matthew and Steph didn't know it at the time, but the FNAF series was going to be the longest and most prominent series in game theory history. Game theory continued to grow like crazy. It seemed like the only thing holding the growth back was Matthew's job at Defy. It was a hard decision because they didn't want to solely rely on the channel for income. But seeing as the channel was doing well and it was continuing to grow, Matthew took a leap of faith and quit his job at Defy to go all in on YouTube. This was a super scary thing for Matthew because game theory could fall off any day. So Matthew began to work harder than he had ever worked in his life to make sure game theory was a success. He was posting weekly theory videos and upping the quality as much as he could every single video. But after a few months, the workload became too much to handle. So Steph quit her job at a biotech company to come and help run the channel. The series that fans continued to love the most was the FNAF series. So this prompted Matthew and Steph to post more FNAF videos than anything else. Everything was going good, but a problem had risen. You see, around that time, in 2012 to 2014, the average lifespan of a YouTube channel was about 5 years. And although game theory wasn't looking like it was going to slow down anytime soon, it was approaching that 5-year mark. And Matthew and Steph wanted to play it safe, so they had to think of a way to bring in income if game theory was to ever fail. They eventually came up with the idea to start a brand new channel that they would make similar videos to game theory, but instead of making videos about games, they would make it about movies and films. This was cool because Matthew always wanted to make videos on movies and films anyways, so it was perfect. And on June 2nd, 2015, Matthew and Steph launched Film Theory, with the goal for the channel to essentially be a hedge if game theory ever died. They made sure that the channel was its own entity with no strings attached to game theory. Matthew and Steph didn't want it to feel like a side channel, so they launched it with 5 good videos and a channel trailer. Aside from the launch of Film Theory and Game Theory hitting 5 million subscribers, Matthew wanted to do something different. He wanted to theorize and talk about different games, but without it being highly edited and scripted. He also wanted a place to have fun with his audience. So on the 9th of October 2015, Matthew and Steph created another channel called GT Live. This would be a place where Matthew and Steph could live stream, talk about games, and also just hang out with the audience. It was a neat little addition to the Theorist brand where the more deep-cut fans could go and hang out. The channel essentially helped build more of a culture around game theory, and Matthew would have little reoccurring characters on the show, such as his cat Skip and Pikachu. Matthew and Steph would even collab with other creators and do fun little competitions. In 2015, Matthew was asked by YouTube to do a series for their new subscription service called YouTube Red. This was essentially YouTube Premium at the time. For this series, Matthew would be hosting / working on a high-budget show called Game Lab. This was different from anything else that Matthew had ever done. Matthew is used to YouTube, and this would be run more like a TV show. This offer was too good for Matthew to say no to. Matthew and Steph ended up working on the show for about a year behind the scenes. Then on the 8th of June 2016, they released a trailer for the series.
Hey, I'm MatPat, and for the last 5 years, I've been mixing science and video games, asking what happens when you bring games into the real world. But now I'm getting to actually do that for the first time ever.
The show was essentially what Matthew had been doing for years on his channel, seeing if stuff in video games could work in real life. But instead of him talking about the game and just using math and science to see if stuff was accurate, he would be living the video game. The series turned out really good and you could watch it on the Game Theory channel. Actually, the most viewed Game Theory video is an episode of Game Lab titled Can Gamers Survive Real Mirror's Edge? The video currently sits at 98 million views. So I guess that you could say that the series was a success. Other than YouTube asking Matthew to do a YouTube Red show, they also asked him something different. Something that was arguably much more important. You see, YouTube was tasked with sending some of their most trusted and respected creators to Rome, Italy so that they could meet the Pope. This was because the Pope wanted to talk to some of the most influential people within the internet space, so he could learn more about the internet and how it could bring people together. Matthew was more than happy to be able to represent the gaming side of YouTube. Gaming has never been given a really good reputation within the media, or really by anyone outside of gaming culture, so Matthew wanted to fix the bad reputation by giving the Pope a copy of Undertale. This may seem like an odd game for Matthew to give to the Pope, because it wasn't really that significant of a game for Matthew. You would think he would give him something like FNAF, Chrono Triggers, or any of the Mario games. But no, he chose Undertale. The purpose that he did this came down to one underlying reason. You see, the bad rap that video games normally got always came down to violence. Video games were always slandered for being this thing that would make people more violent, and seeing as the top games of the time were Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, and Assassin's Creed, it's kind of hard to argue against that point. But a game like Undertale is a game where you don't need to resort to violence. A game where you can win, but also keep the peace. And it's not just the fact that you can be passive within the game, it's the fact that the game did super well within the gaming community. A game that doesn't have a violent nature doing well within the gaming community pretty much disproves most of the allegations that video games cause violence. So by Matthew giving the Pope a copy of Undertale, this was a sign that gaming is not just some violent activity that people play it out to be. It's something that could bring peace. It's misunderstood. So on May 29th, 2016, Matthew met with Pope Francis. After meeting Pope Francis, Game Theory was closing in on 7 million subscribers, and was still growing at a super steady pace. Everyone seemed to watch at least Game Theory or Film Theory, except Disney. They weren't a big fan of Film Theory. But on June 24th, 2016, Matthew did something that changed his outlook on YouTube as a whole. Matthew was asked to speak at VidCon 2016. This may not seem like that significant of an event, but it was for Matthew. This was one of the first times that he was able to see a large group of his fans in one place.
Hi, I'm MatPat from Game Theory and Film Theory. For the front section here that knows who I am, fantastic, thank you.
This did something for Matthew. It put into perspective what the numbers behind his channel actually meant. It showed him that these were actually real people, and it showed how much of an impact that the Theory brand was creating in the world. From this point on, this was one of Matthew's favorite parts about making videos. Sure, the views and subscribers were cool and all, but Matthew enjoyed the fact that his videos brightened people's days. He enjoyed the fact that people would hang out with him and Steph for an hour and a half on a GT Live show, just because of how much Game Theory made their day brighter. And this was one of the main forces going forward that drove them to work so hard to make good videos. On the 9th of July, 2018, Matthew and Stephanie Patrick became parents.
Could Steph and I be pregonate? How do we know if we're pregnant? Can oo get pregante?
All jokes aside, they did have a boy named Ollie. This was arguably the most important thing to ever happen to Matthew, and that says a lot, because just a few months later on April 18th, 2018, something else happened that was deemed impossible at times. Something that Matthew and Stephanie never thought would happen. Game Theory hit 10 million subscribers. Now that Matthew and Steph had a kid and also 10 million subscribers, they wanted to work on a project and use their fanbase to do something more positive for the platform. They wanted to host a charity live stream, specifically for St. Jude, because they were moved when they saw the work that St. Jude was doing for kids. They wanted to do something great for those kids. They wanted to raise $1 million. And not just that, but they wanted to raise $1 million on a single live stream. This was an outlandish goal, and they didn't have that much faith in themselves actually being able to hit it, but they thought it was a cool number to aim for. Matthew and Steph prepared for the stream for a few months, planned out activities, invited every YouTuber they knew to be a part of the stream, and even rented out a professional studio. They were set. The plan for the stream was for it to go for 10 hours, and for those 10 hours, they were just going to hang out and have fun. And there would also be incentives for the audience to donate. And on the 3rd of December, 2019, Matthew and Stephanie went live for the first ever annual $1 million challenge stream. This live stream surpassed every single expectation that Matthew had for it. They raised $1.7 million for charity, absolutely demolishing their original goal of $1 million. And $800,000 was donated by Scott Cawthon, the creator of FNAF. All around, this stream had a crazy positive impact for YouTube as a whole, not just because they raised over $1 million for St. Jude, but also because YouTube didn't have a YouTube Rewind that year. And all of the other previous YouTube Rewinds were never really seen in a good light because YouTube was doing what they wanted to do, not what the creators or audience wanted. But this stream brought together 50 to 60 of the top creators on the planet to do something positive. It essentially acted as the perfect YouTube Rewind. Aside from the charity stream, Matthew and Steph were excited to announce the launch of the next theory channel within the lineup. This was Food Theory. Matthew and Steph wanted this channel to be different. They didn't just want to do theories, but they also wanted to provide information to the viewers that would help them within their everyday lives, with videos like Never Order McDonald's Medium Fries, or You've Been Scammed and Never Knew It, Supermarket Secrets. But they also stuck to their roots and made videos like Kool-Aid Man is Marvel's next villain. And just like Game Theory and Film Theory, this wasn't going to be just a side channel. It was going to be completely its own entity with its own audience and everything. So on the 23rd of July 2020, Food Theory was launched with 5 videos and a channel trailer. And within a week, it grew to 1 million subscribers, becoming one of the fastest channels ever to reach the 1 million subscriber milestone. This just goes to show how much trust that the Theorist brand had built with their audience over the years. Matthew and Steph wanted to host another charity stream for St. Jude because of how the previous year turned out. They wanted to outdo themselves and put on a better show than 2019. But something happened during 2020.
Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
This is a rapidly emerging situation.
COVID-19 was a massive hindrance on their ability to pull off a great live stream. But they did have one thing on their side, and that was preparation. They started preparing for the stream months in advance, planning out every little detail. They kept having to replan the event because COVID restrictions kept changing, but eventually they settled on a final plan. This plan would include Mr. Beast and ZHC giving out prizes, Mark Rober building an obstacle course for Matthew, and a robot that would cut Matthew's hair during the stream. Needless to say, this was going to be the craziest stream yet. They kept the same goal of $1 million, but their sights were set relatively low in comparison to the previous year because a lot of people were struggling and out of jobs due to COVID. Matthew and Steph still stayed positive, and on the 1st of December 2020, Matthew and Steph went live, and it was crazy. Matthew and Steph raising this much money in 9 hours during lockdown pushed the boundaries of what a creator could actually accomplish, and it carried a positive ripple across the platform. The stream eventually went on to get over 21 million views. Aside from Matthew and Steph holding their third and final charity stream where they raised $1.6 million for St. Jude, hitting 15 million subscribers on Game Theory, hosting the Streamy Awards, which actually wasn't that cringe this time, and also becoming enemies with Disney throughout the process, Matthew and Steph were in the process of creating their fourth and final channel within the Theory lineup, Style Theory. This channel was going to be more about, well, style and fashion-based theories. The channel was launched on the 18th of February 2023, and much like the launch of Food Theory, it grew to 1 million subscribers insanely fast. But instead of taking a week, it grew to 1 million subscribers in only 3 days. It was actually one of the fastest channels to ever grow to 1 million subscribers. And at this point, Matthew had one of the strongest audiences on the platform. He had a top channel in 4 different niches. This was something that no one had ever achieved on YouTube. The year was 2023, and a game developer named Scott Cawthon was in the production process of creating a movie about his game, Five Nights at Freddy's. Matthew was now a huge fan of this franchise, and he had made well over 60 plus theories about FNAF on the Game Theory channel alone. Some might even say that Matthew and the Theorist brand had a lot to do with the continual success of FNAF. Scott Cawthon knew that Matthew was a huge positive to the FNAF brand, and he's actually had some interactions with Matthew in the past. So Scott asked Matthew if he wanted to make a cameo within the FNAF movie. Matthew was more than happy to be a part of this project. His part in the movie was a waiter named Ness, because Scott was a big fan of the Sans' Ness video. Matthew really enjoyed being a part of this film because he had never really got to fulfill his dreams of being an actor. And being on a real movie set next to Scott Cawthon was one of the most surreal experiences in the world. Even if no one noticed who Matthew was in the movie, he was still glad to be a part of this great project. The movie was released on the 27th of October, 2023. Matthew never saw himself as this celebrity that everyone knew. He didn't really even expect anyone to know who he was. Matthew just saw himself as a mid-tier creator. But the reactions that the theater gave said the complete opposite thing.
Welcome to Sparky's. Can I set you folks up with some appetizers? Hey, welcome to Sparky's.
Oh my God, it's him!
Is that Freddy Fazbear?
It's MatPat.
Hey, welcome to Sparky's.
It's MatPat! It's MatPat! No way! It's MatPat! Oh! It's up!
Some people say that, but you know, it's just a theory. I'm using the
Arguably, the last year that Matthew was on the platform was his greatest year yet. His fanbase was at its strongest, and he was putting out more content than ever with the 5 channels. But with the good, always comes the bad. You see, Matthew had been posting weekly on multiple channels for almost a decade. And alongside that, Matthew was a father now, and he wanted to play a more active role in his kid's life instead of constantly working. As much as Matthew loved hosting the channels, it was taking a lot of time away from him raising his kid. He was watching Ollie grow up before his eyes. He couldn't give that up. But all of Matthew's time was taken away by his 5 channels. It had gotten so bad that Matthew and Steph couldn't play video games or even eat dinner without talking about work. It wasn't like they could all of a sudden slow down the channels either. If they did that, then there was a likely chance that the channels could die. There weren't really that many solutions for them. Except one. Matthew and Steph had been talking about retirement since 2018. And they'd even created a plan to hand off the channels to a new group of hosts so that the Theorist brand could live on if they were to ever leave the channels. In between not getting to spend enough time with their kid as they wanted and also seeing other massive creators leave YouTube, they decided that the time was right. So Matthew and Steph wanted to go out with a bang. They prepared 10 final MatPat theories on each of the theory channels, and they were going to play the finale where everything started. Just MatPat chatting with his audience on the Game Theory channel. Then Matthew would hand off the channel to the next set of theory hosts in a spectacular and cinematic finale. And on the 9th of March 2024, MatPat posted his final theory. But this isn't the end of Matthew's story though. You see, Matthew had been popping up in different videos all around YouTube, and he even popped up in my good friends Lucas and Curtis's video because they made a movie trailer about his life. Speaking of Lucas and Curtis, they were a huge help in the production of this video because they were kind enough to lend me their interview that they did with Stephanie Patrick. So make sure that you go and subscribe to their channel so that they can get to 5 million subscribers. And also go watch their masterpiece that they made about MatPat. Anyways, bye!